What the hell did I just read? Seriously, I've read hundreds of strange and messed up stories throughout my time on YouTube, but I have never come across one that was this bizarre, this terrifying, while simultaneously teaching a real wholesome lesson. The only book that comes to mind is this book's predecessor, The Iron Giant, which I covered the messed up origins of back in 2022. When author Ted Hughes wrote the Iron Giant novel, originally titled The Iron Man, he had world peace on the mind. Without going too deep into spoilers just yet, he used an incredibly overpowered but misunderstood space invader to illustrate the dangers of war and how avoiding unnecessary conflicts sets a proper example for younger generations. He must have realized there was, ironically, still one war left to fight after world peace was achieved though, because 25 years later he wrote a sequel, The Iron Woman, which shined a spotlight on another of Hughes' concerns, the environment. Hughes was as much a writer as he was an environmentalist, and so his concern about ecological destruction and the corporate exploitation of natural resources was well known by his fans and critics alike. This concern is the central theme of The Iron Woman, and unlike The Iron Man, which employed more abstract and mythical metaphors, The Iron Woman is blunt in its critique of those who would harm our planet for their personal gain. And while I do think it's possible for Hughes to have gotten his point across without conjuring up mental images reminiscent of an eldritch horror, it wouldn't have been nearly as interesting. So today, in our second official installment of Messed Up Sequels, we're looking at the wholesome and unhinged horror that is The Iron Woman. You might remember the Iron Giant book starting out on an ominous note, while the Iron Woman follows in those massive footsteps, only in addition to ominous, it's terrifying. See, while the first book's protagonist was a boy named Hogarth, the second book's hero, or heroine, is a young girl named Logarth. Nah, her name's Lucy. It was the start of spring break, and Lucy was walking along her usual route home from school. Only as she approached the bridge overlooking the local river, she noticed something unusual. On the surface of the river's water was an eel, and it appeared to be convulsing, almost like it was in pain. Lucy watched as the poor creature wriggled uncontrollably, nodding and unknodding itself over and over again, when suddenly she heard a scream. At least she thought it was a scream. It sounded like a mix between a woman crying and a siren wailing. And as it continued to get louder, she felt the ground shaking beneath her feet. And you guys know the old saying, when the ground starts a-shakin', get the hell out of there. And apparently Lucy was familiar with that mantra too. Worried that her parents might be in danger from wreckage caused by the earthquake, she sprinted home. At the exact same time this was going down, a bird watcher was examining a bird's nest a half a mile away. He had found the nest containing a dead mother bird and her eggs when the earthquake hit, and he knew he had to get to safety. The bird watcher sprinted to his car, threw his gear in the back seat, and floored it in the direction of town. But only moments later, he was already slamming on the brakes, because standing in front of him was a monster. At least that was the only way he could describe it, for the monster extended its giant, dripping hand toward his vehicle, and he jumped out just in time for the beast to grab the car and smash it against the road, destroying it completely. And I wish I could say he got away without a scratch, but he wasn't so lucky. As he ran as fast as he could away from the monstrosity, a ball of mud as big as his body slammed into his back, knocking him to the ground. Fortunately, he was still alive, and his attacker had gotten distracted with a new target. So after gathering his bearings, he started sprinting towards town once again, ready to tell everyone about his near-death experience. When Lucy burst through the front door of her house, she was surprised to see that everything was normal. Her mom didn't even know there was an earthquake, though her father did have a funny story about a local birdwatcher who came into the village post office jabbering about crashing his car and blaming it on some monster. Skipping ahead to that night, Lucy is lying down in her attic bedroom when she hears someone lumber up the steps and try turning her doorknob. The door was locked, but Lucy had a strange feeling in her gut, like she was in danger, so she curled up in her blanket and turned away from the door, only for it to burst open. She was too scared to see who it was, but she could hear those lumbering footsteps approaching her bedside, and suddenly a cold, wet hand grabbed her by the shoulder and forced her to turn around. Now, anyone who's seen a scary movie should know exactly what to expect here, for there is nothing in all of horror cinema that's creepier than this. When Lucy turned around, she was horrified to see a little girl, dripping from head to toe in pitch black oil. She was crying, begging for Lucy to wake up, and so Lucy did. It was just a dream. But what happened next was no less bizarre. Lucy heard a tap on her window, and when she looked outside, there was an immense creature holding out a foxglove, a kind of flower that did not typically grow at this time of year. She accepted the gift, and the creature stepped away, so Lucy went outside to see if it wanted her to follow it. The beast was just sitting in Lucy's driveway, looking like an amorphous mess of dirt, mud, foliage, and various slimes and sludges, so Lucy hosted off to reveal a shiny metal exterior and a rather feminine face. It was some kind of iron giant, an iron woman. Hey, that's what the book is titled. Who said that? The Iron Woman wanted more water to get herself totally clean, so Lucy takes her to the local canal, but upon arriving, they see it's been totally drained, revealing the heaping piles of trash at the bottom. There's old bikes, TV sets, furniture, and more, so they go to the river instead. But when the Iron Woman jumps in, the water burns her eyes, and she lets out a wail that sounded a lot like the wailing siren Lucy heard the day before. It's at this point that Lucy and the Iron Woman have their own little Galadriel and Frodo moment. The Iron Woman reveals to Lucy why she is here, and what kind of future she can expect if her mission fails. But she doesn't do it with her words. She shows her. The woman wrapped her hand around Lucy, and suddenly Lucy was overwhelmed by a weird, horrible sound. A roar of cries, thousands, millions of cries, wailings, groans, screams. The dreadful sound seemed to pound her body, as if she were standing under a waterfall of it, as if it might batter her off her feet, or as if she were standing in a railway tunnel, and the express train was rushing towards her, an express of screaming voices. At a certain point, Lucy couldn't help but pull away, and the Iron Woman revealed that sound was the cry of the marsh, the insects, the worms, the birds, the fish, and frogs that live in the ponds and rivers. They were crying out in pain. And this is where things get really intense. To drive her point home, the Iron Woman conjures a vision of the river carrying its inhabitants into a fiery pit, and Lucy could hear them screaming in pain, begging for mercy. But there was more than just animals and creepy crawlies in its waters. She could also see a helpless human baby floating along to its fiery death. At this point, Iron Woman reveals that she's here to destroy them, and she goes into a fit of rage that resembles the Iron Giant when he remembers his original purpose in the movie. She proclaims the imminent destruction of the poisoners, the ignorant ones, the rubbishers, and Lucy knew exactly who she was talking about. Before we shed light on that mystery, though, I want to tell you about our sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace has been sponsoring this show for over 5 years now, and the reason I continue to work with them is because they're actually the best at what they do. See, whether you own a small business or have a side hustle you want to take to the next level, having a functional and aesthetic website is a necessity. And now, thanks to Squarespace, it's easier than ever to create one. I recommend starting with their newest feature, Design Intelligence, because all it needs is a little bit of info about your industry, your goals, and personality to create a stunning site that fits your brand identity and has all the features that your customers, clients, or fans are looking for. From exclusive content for paying members to a storefront where you can sell your homemade goods. And have I mentioned they adapt your site to mobile devices for you, guaranteeing a seamless experience for your visitors regardless of where they're coming from. Head over to squarespace.com/Jon Solo to start your free trial, and when you're ready to launch, be sure to use code Jon Solo to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. As mentioned earlier, The Iron Woman is a direct sequel to The Iron Giant, originally titled The Iron Man, and similar to the first book, we aren't given a specific location for where The Iron Woman is set. Author Ted Hughes was from the UK, so I think it's reasonable to assume it's somewhere around there. But there's a very direct reference to the United States and what was taking place here when Hughes wrote the first book in the 60s. You see, when the Iron Woman was ranting and raving about who she was gonna smother with her big ol' iron who she was going to destroy, Lucy knew exactly who her victim was going to be, because Lucy's town was actually a hub for all the world's trash thanks to a massive waste factory that had recently doubled in size. A lot of people in town worried how the factory was affecting the environment, with some claiming that it was actually poisoning the wildlife. But until the Iron Woman arrived, nobody had stepped up to challenge them. This was probably because the factory employed everyone in town, including Lucy's dad, a fact that made the Iron Woman's planned destruction of the place even more terrifying. Lucy realizes she only has one option for who she can call for help. It's not her parents. They'd think she'd gone mental and send her to the doctor. It wasn't any other adults. They either wouldn't take her seriously or would tell her parents themselves. No, instead, Lucy resorted to writing a letter to the one and only Hogarth, the only human to successfully bond with an Iron Giant. Now at this point, Hogarth is pretty famous, and he got fan mail from all over the world, but something about Lucy's letter stuck out to him. Maybe it was her mentioning another Iron Giant. After all, the book states that Hogarth often wondered if the Iron Man had any relatives somewhere. They'd be hidden away, of course, quite likely in some deep mud hole or in the sea, or inside the earth. After all, the Iron Man had come from somewhere. Why shouldn't there be others? Then again, it may have been her mentioning that the Iron Woman was going to slaughter dozens of innocent people that caught his eye. Regardless, Hogarth hopped on the next train and arrived at Lucy's the following day. And here's where the book starts to transition from a little bit fantastical to what the hell is going on? Because when Hogarth shows up to help Lucy, they start searching for the Iron Woman, who's evidently gone into hiding. They check in all the places the Iron Man would hide, like in the nearby rivers and woods, and while helping each other cross some treacherous terrain, something crazy happens. Remember that horrifying vision the Iron Woman cursed Lucy with? Well, when Lucy makes physical contact with Hogarth, she passes it on to him, in what I can only describe as sensory overload. Anybody looking at them would have seen nothing but a boy and a girl holding hands under the woodside, but to them it was as if they were trapped in a tunnel, flattened against the wall, while an express train went past within inches of their faces. In every cry of the terrific roaring blast, it seemed to him that he could see a wild face, a mouth stretched wide, a body hunched up. Even though he was simply gazing at the far edge of the sea, it was as if he were looking through the earth and seeing it crammed full of every possible kind of creature, all screaming, wailing with all their might, where the tiniest shrimp sounded like a mad elephant, and stickleback sounded like trapped tigers, and slim black leeches like bellowing alligators. So this was a jarring experience for Hogarth, but it made he and Lucy realize that they can pass this gift of sight to others, so they go to the waste factory with the intention of doing just that. And it's here that we get another one of Hugh's poetic and vivid descriptions, this time about the factory and all the waste it was producing. It had been built outside the town and right beside the river. At first, it had merely crushed old vehicles for scrap. Then it had begun to recycle waste of certain kinds. Then it grew bigger and began to recycle waste of all kinds. Now it collected waste from other countries. It grew bigger, with incinerators burning night and day. It grew bigger, with acres of oil drums painted all colors and piled in teetering stacks, full of nameless waste from different industries and different countries. A fleet of articulated trucks came and went constantly, bringing in the waste or taking waste out to be dumped in other places. Nearly all the people in town and in the villages around worked there. They called it Chicago. Wait, what? Chicago? That seems kind of random. What, is he calling my city a dump or something? What's wrong with Chicago, Ted Hughes? You got something against wearing Kevlar when you check the mailbox? Too good to fear for your life on a daily basis? No, Chicago was a very different place when Hughes wrote the Iron Man book in the 1960s, and his impression of the city at that time clearly had stuck with him until he wrote the Iron Woman in the 90s. Yes, the 60s was roughly when Frank Sinatra released his cover of Chicago, but while it may have been a toddling town back then, and when the song was originally written in the 20s, it was also dirty as hell. Throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, Chicago was recognized internationally as a center of industrial might, and as a direct consequence, environmental degradation. As the heart of American meatpacking, railroad expansion, steel production, and chemical manufacturing, the city came to represent both the promises and perils of industrial capitalism. Rapid industrialization led to the pollution of the Chicago River, the construction of vast infrastructure to reroute sewage and waste, and widespread air and water contamination. The publication of Upton Sinclair's book, The Jungle, not to be confused with The Jungle Book, also helped cement Chicago's reputation as a place where labor exploitation and environmental harm went hand in hand, and is the perfect solution for anyone who wasn't feeling depressed today but desperately wanted to. Anyway, back to the story. While Hogarth and Lucy head to the factory, they're lucky enough to cross paths with the Iron Woman, and they convince her to delay her attack one more day because the Iron Giant is on his way. In reality, he wasn't. Hogarth planned on calling him, but hadn't yet, and wasn't even sure if he would agree to help. But they needed more time, so they lied right to her giant iron face. Now, the factory is so busy that it's surprisingly easy for Lucy and Hogarth to just waltz right in and burst into the manager's office. The manager, named J. Wells, tells them to get the hell out, but Lucy grabs hold of his wrist and gives him the fright like the Iron Woman did to her. Then another employee walks in to see what all the commotion is about, and Hogarth grabs him by the ears, giving him the fright as well. This goes on for a while. As more people check in, more people are given the fright. But for reasons I don't understand, Hogarth is oddly obsessed with grabbing these individuals by the ears. He makes more than one comment about how excited he was to do it and how fun it was after he did it. Like, Lucy, did you see that guy's giant ears? I grabbed those sons of bitches. Ultimately, Lucy and Hogarth are thrown out of the factory, but by that point, almost everyone there was hearing these screams of pain from the poisoned animals and babies the fright connected them to. When they returned home that night, Lucy gave her parents the fright as well, only so they'd believe her claims about the Iron Woman. Lucy and Hogarth were also surprised to see that journalists were waiting at her front door to interview them. Apparently, word about what happened at the factory had gotten out, and the media wanted the big scoop. They didn't get one, though. Instead, the exhausted kids went to bed, but not before Hogarth made a private call to the phone that was installed inside the Iron Giant's head, the one that only he had the number to, and requested his help. He wasn't sure if he'd get it, but that night he fell asleep with a hopeful dream that the Iron Man was walking across the earth in a straight line to be by his side. Okay, I know that I've really hyped up this story as being strange as hell, and you might have been a little underwhelmed so far. This is the chapter where all of that changes. So it turns out that Hogarth's dream came true. The Iron Giant sojourned across the earth to help the Iron Woman accomplish her mission with the least amount of destruction possible. And the way that he does this is the most insane thing I've read in a while. It also feels like kind of a cop-out. In order to fully understand what happens next, you'll have to read the Iron Giant book or see my episode on it. Because remember the space bat angel dragon that threatened to eat all the humans on Earth until the Iron Giant made it his slave? Well, he comes back to Earth, and not in the way that I expected, or even really understood. The Iron Giant takes hold of the Iron Woman's hands, then blasts bright red beams out of his eyes toward the sky, which evidently summons the dragon. We're told that a whirlwind of scales descends to the earth from space, then enters the Iron Woman's body, after which the Iron Man reveals that he's granted her the nigh infinite power of the space bat angel dragon, and that she should be careful about what she wishes for because now it will come true. So when I first read this, I honestly thought it was a pretty cheap tactic on Hughes' part. Like, oh, our protagonist has a problem with no obvious solution. Let's make them a god so they can do whatever they want. It's like a deviation away from being a Deus Ex Machina situation. But I must say, the way Iron Woman uses her new powers is creative enough that I'm willing to give it a pass. Because the big issue is, even with the factory being completely infected with the Fright, it just wasn't enough to overpower the pre-existing fear that motivated them. The age-old pursuit of the almighty dollar, and the idea that shutting the factory down even for a moment would have catastrophic effects on their bottom line. The Iron Woman had a new plan now, so she told Lucy to go meet with the news team that's at the factory and give them the interview they've been wanting. So remember back in 2019 when that Swedish girl, Greta Thunberg, gave that impassioned speech accusing older generations of sacrificing the health of our planet to line their own pockets and leaving young folks with a giant mess to clean up? The "How dare you" speech. Well, our hero Lucy gets to have her own Greta Thunberg moment, where she proclaims the Iron Woman's message into a multitude of microphones for the entire world to hear. Although it didn't take her long to realize that her words were falling on deaf ears. But at that moment, a secretary working for the factory forced his way through the crowd, shouting about how they were interviewing the wrong person, when suddenly his eyes went wide, his mouth started opening and closing, and he began writhing on the ground. Or flopping might be a better word for it. No, he was not having a seizure. The secretary had transformed into an eel. But it wasn't just the secretary. Every single man who worked at that factory was transforming. Some became sea lions, others catfish, and the women at the factory realized that these guys would need water to survive. Soon enough, an assembly line had formed to move these new aquatic creatures to the nearby river. The same river the factory had been dumping waste into. Remember when Lucy saw the eel at the start of the story and it was squirming in pain, and how the Iron Woman's eyes burned when she jumped in the water? Well, our new fishy friends had to endure all of that and worse. There was only one man who didn't anamorph, and that was the chief engineer. But after the women forced him to shut down the factory under the threat of tearing him limb from limb like Orpheus, he transformed too. We soon learned that it wasn't just the factory workers who became aquatic creatures, but rather every single man in the country who was 18 or older, including the ones who turned 18 that day. They blew out their candles and went floppy like a fish. And now things take a darker turn, because without men to do their jobs, the country started falling apart. Electricity failed, computers went dead, TVs went blank, gas pumps stopped working, telephones went dead, and there was no longer a train running that could take Hogarth home. The entire country was at a standstill, and if the Iron Woman didn't release the men from her spell, the women and children those men unwillingly abandoned would die. And if you thought the entire penile population being turned into fish was as strange as it could get, brace yourself, because in the words of Hughes, the strangest things of all were still to come. If you were thinking, at this point the men will have surely learned their lesson, I bet the Iron Woman changes them back soon, then you're way off. And so was I. Hughes must have been trying to one-up the world-ending threat of the space bat angel dragon from the first book. And when we get to the end, I want you to comment your thoughts on whether or not he was successful. The book's final chapter opens with Lucy and Hogarth pleading with the Iron Woman to change the men back before someone gets seriously hurt. But she refuses and says something very specific needs to happen. What could be more specific than anamorphing every man that's 18 years or older into an aquatic beast? How about if those beasts start breathing out dark, smoky bubbles? You heard that right. At a certain point, all of the Iron Woman's victims started emitting this weird smoky substance that floated to the sky and hung over Lucy's town to form a dark, gloomy cloud. A cloud that seemed to groan in pain. Lucy and Hogarth were afraid, but the Iron Giants went on the offense, shooting bright red beams of light from their eyes into the cloud. Then, as our four heroes watch from the hilltop, they see the monster's many terrible eyes start to open, while its amorphous, octopus-like body stretched across the land. Its long, tangled legs spreading out in every direction, like a massive spider trapping the entire town in its web. As they watched, the mouth opened wider. The cloud was now sobbing like a giant baby, with wide open mouth. A mouth that opened wider and wider, squeezing the eyes shut. The four strong red beams from the eyes of the two Iron Giants plunged into the darkness of the gaping, toad-like mouth of the great spider cloud. This eldritch horror continued to sob in pain while the giants kept their laser beams fixed on it. They demanded it reveal its identity and refused to accept anything but the truth.
I am the spider god of wealth. Wealth, wealth, the spider god of more and more and more and more money. I catch it in my web.
But this answer wouldn't suffice. Suddenly, the spider cloud stopped crying and started laughing. Then it confessed.
I am the spider god of gain, the spider god of winning at all costs. I catch the prize in my net.
And catch the prize it did. The spider cloud's blue lizard-like tongue shoots out, wraps around the Iron Man, and pulls him into its mouth. Then the tongue lunged at the Iron Woman, but it didn't go back inside because she had caught it in her hands and started pulling it, almost like she intended to rip it out of the creature's mouth. She pulled the creature so close that she was able to climb up what was left of its tongue and went inside. And this was not the succulent Chinese meal the monster was hoping for. Remember earlier in the story when the Iron Woman went full rage mode and started stomping around while the deafening screams of the animals filled Lucy's head? Well, she did this same terrible dance inside the monster's stomach, while the Iron Man beat his chest like a drum. This caused so much pain for the monster that it had no choice but to finally reveal the truth. In between groans of misery, it confessed.
I am mess. I am mess. Mother will clean me up.
At this moment, the mess, as it was called, began to turn and twist, not unlike the eel from Chapter 1. Something about the Iron Woman's dance had changed. It turns out she released the space bat angel dragon the Iron Man had sealed inside of her, and it exited in a whirlwind, a massive space tornado that wrapped up the spider cloud and its tentacles like spaghetti around a fork. As the dragon rose up and returned to space, the spider cloud was pulled up with it, and the world would be changed forever after. Before I explain how, though, I should tell you that our Iron Heroes survived. They were very badly burned. Apparently the belly of the beast was like a furnace, but if you read the first story, you'll know that's nothing new for the Iron Man. As for the rest of the country, the fright that infected everyone at the factory and beyond all but disappeared, although it would come screaming back to anyone who hurt the environment. All the men who were transfigured into fish became men once more, but all of their hair had turned white from the sheer terror of the experience. And it stayed that way. So it seems like everybody's learned their lesson, right? But the Iron Woman's primary concern was changing their behavior. So what was done about that? Well, in addition to the aforementioned reminders they were left with, after the mess monster was vanquished, people started finding thick yellow webbing all over their waste products. From toxic laundry chemicals to simple household garbage, any kind of waste would emit a smoky mist that essentially transformed it into yellow webbing. And my guess is this webbing must have been Ted Hughes' dream solution for protecting the environment. I think he could recognize and appreciate the many ways that mankind has benefited from industry, but as an environmentalist, he couldn't make peace with the long-term, irreversible damage it was doing to our planet, to our home. So, in his fictional universe, he dreamt up a new fuel source, one with no negative side effects. The mysterious new webbing could mix with water to make gasoline or oil, but fish were safe to live in it, and when it burned, it didn't emit any toxins. Even better, whenever hazardous waste did leak into the environment, the webs would stop forming. So basically, everyone was motivated to change their ways to get more of the magic fuel. And I know you guys are concerned about the poor executives at the factory. Were they able to make any profit in the end? Or were they forced to close their doors and stop polluting the planet for good? I'm happy to share they not only thrived, but became sustainable because the waste they collected and stored turned into web fuel that they sold to other countries. In the end, we aren't given a clear explanation for what the webs are and why they suddenly started appearing though. The Iron Woman simply says that whatever was making those smoky bubbles is now making the webbing. And the Iron Man simply adds, big deep fright, big deep change. The way I interpret this is, whatever the force was that motivated men to make a sprawling society that prioritizes growth at any cost, was now motivating them to make that society safe and efficient, to live in harmony with the planet instead of exploiting it. Unfortunately, I don't think the corporate fat cats of the real world will be at all inspired to look out for others' best interests anytime soon, but I guess it's nice to imagine that reality is only one or two cataclysmic events away. It reminds me of that quote that popped up on the game over screen of one of the old Call of Duties. I don't remember who said it or the exact phrasing, but it was something to the effect of, if mankind was facing an existential threat from outside our world, that humans would forget our own differences and unite immediately. You might not agree with it, but based on the 2 Iron Giant books, Ted Hughes certainly did. Anyway, the novel ends on a rather wholesome note. Iron Woman makes a necklace of flowers for Lucy, Hogarth, the Iron Man, and herself, and the group sits together on the hilltop, admiring the view of their new, clean town and relaxing to the serene song of the space bat Angel Dragon. And I must say, while I do think that Ted Hughes was right to keep the true origins of the Iron Giant a secret, because, like Yoda, that's what makes them so interesting, I would have loved if he wrote another 1 or 2 Iron Giant books. The first one was The Iron Man, the second, The Iron Woman, the third would have been The Iron Giants, and the fourth would have had the most obvious title of all, The Iron Giants 4, The Squeakquel Reloaded. This time, it's personal. It's just that line in Chapter 3 where Hogarth wonders if there were other Iron Giants and where they might be hiding, got me wondering the same thing. There's gotta be one inside a volcano in Hawaii, right? And I imagine there's another buried underneath Stonehenge. Where do you think the Iron Giants might be hiding? Let me know in a comment below, and bonus points if you include a mission for them. I'm also curious to know if you would want an Iron Woman movie. I don't think there is any chance of us getting one, with the original being a box office disaster, despite also being a masterpiece, and Warner Brothers proving time and time again they can't properly manage a single one of the beloved and well-established IPs they own. But I could be wrong. All I know for sure is that I'll see you on Thursday. Until then, my name is Jon Solo, and remember, Jon shot first.